"Get out of my house." The roar rattled the chandelier as Tamara Lewis froze in the Billionaire's spotless kitchen, clutching the pot she'd just pulled from the stove. Across the gleaming marble island, Charles Whitman's face was flushed with fury, his baby son wailing in anguish. "I said out." Charles barked again, his voice breaking over the baby's cries. Tamara's heart hammered, but she didn't move. She had been called in last minute by the housekeeper's cousin, told only, "There's a child who won't stop crying. They need someone who knows babies." She hadn't asked questions. She couldn't afford to. Rent was due in 3 days, and her check from cleaning offices barely covered groceries. The baby's sobs pierced through the marble silence, raw and desperate. Tamara's hand shook as she opened the pot, releasing a wave of rich, savory aroma that filled the cold kitchen. Chicken stew, her grandmother's recipe, the one she used to make for her younger siblings when their stomachs gnawed with hunger and their mother worked double shifts. Charles's eyes narrowed. "You think you can solve this with food? My son hasn't eaten all day. Doctors, specialists. No one can stop the crying. And you think a maid's dish will?" Tamara swallowed hard, her voice steady but low. "It's not just food. It's comfort. Babies can taste love too." The billionaire's jaw clenched, his designer suit rumpled from hours of cradling the screaming child. The boy's face was blotchy, tiny fists pounding against his father's chest. "Please," Tamara whispered, ladling a spoonful into a small bowl. "Just let me try." Charles hesitated, torn between anger and exhaustion. The baby wailed louder, his cries echoing through the cavernous halls of the mansion. Finally, with a curse under his breath, Charles thrust the child into Tamara's arms. "Fine. 1 minute. Then you're gone." Tamara cradled the baby gently, humming under her breath. The stew steam curled around them as she offered the first spoonful. The baby's cries hiccuped, then softened. Another spoonful, and silence. Wide, teary eyes blinked up at her, lips smacking contentedly. Charles stared, disbelief etched into every line of his face. For the first time in hours, his son wasn't crying. The mansion, once filled with echoes of anguish, now held only the quiet sound of a baby eating. And then, to Tamara's shock, Charles Whitman's eyes shimmered. The ruthless billionaire, the man whose name alone could topple companies, blinked rapidly as if fighting something foreign. A tear. One tear slid down his cheek. Tamara held her breath. She didn't know it yet, but that single tear was about to change both of their lives forever. If you're enjoying this story, click subscribe, like this video, and comment what time it is that you're watching this video. Now let's get back to the story. Tamara woke the next morning to the buzzing of her second-hand alarm clock, its plastic casing cracked, its ring too shrill. She rubbed her temples, exhaustion clinging to her bones. The memory of last night still felt unreal, a billionaire's tear sliding down his cheek as his baby finally slept, soothed by her grandmother's stew. Her one-bedroom apartment smelled faintly of bleach and fried onions, leftovers from her shift at the diner. Bills covered the kitchen table like vultures circling. Rent, utilities, the past due notice for her mother's medical treatment. She tied her apron for her morning cleaning job, whispering to herself, "One day at a time." It was the same mantra her grandmother had used raising her, a black woman who fed a whole house on scraps and stretched kindness further than money ever could. That's where Tamara had learned to cook, to stir more than just flavor into a pot, to stir hope. Still, hope didn't pay the rent. At the high-rise office she cleaned, employees breezed past her with headphones in, their eyes never meeting hers. She scrubbed toilets and vacuumed floors, invisible in her uniform. But when she paused for her 15-minute break, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "This is Charles Whitman's office," a crisp voice said. "Mr. Whitman requests your presence again this evening." 6 o'clock sharp. Tamara's heart stuttered. The same man who nearly threw her out of his mansion now wanted her back? At precisely 6, she stood at the iron gates of Whitman Estate, her hands trembling. The mansion loomed like a fortress, all glass and steel against the fading sunset. Inside, the house was silent except for the faint cries of the baby upstairs. Charles appeared at the top of the staircase, his suit impeccable, his expression unreadable. "You came," he said flatly. "I was told to," Tamara replied, her voice steady though her knees felt weak. He studied her a moment, then nodded toward the kitchen. "Do it again." Confusion flickered through her. "Do what again?" "The stew. Whatever you did last night. My son hasn't touched a bottle all day. He cries until he's hoarse. And for some reason, his jaw tightened. He'll eat from you." Tamara's chest softened despite herself. She followed him into the vast, gleaming kitchen, where the baby fussed in a high chair. She unpacked her modest grocery bag. Onions, carrots, chicken thighs wrapped in brown paper, herbs tied with string. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive. As she chopped and stirred, Charles leaned against the counter, arms crossed. His gaze lingered not on the food but on her hands, her rhythm. There was no rush, no panic. Just care, the kind he had long forgotten existed. "Why do you do this?" he asked suddenly. Tamara glanced up, startled. "Do what?" "Work yourself to the bone for strangers. My staff tells me you clean offices, wait tables, and now this. What drives someone to keep going when the world barely notices?" She stirred the pot slowly, the scent of garlic rising. "Because someone has to. Because kindness shouldn't depend on who's watching." Charles's mouth pressed into a line. He had built an empire on the opposite philosophy, that everything had a price and nothing was free. The stew simmered, the air thick with warmth. When she spooned a taste for the baby, his cries melted into eager gulps, just as before. Charles watched, frozen, his powerful facade cracking. For the second night in a row, silence replaced chaos. And for the second night in a row, Charles Whitman felt something shift inside him. Something he didn't have a name for. Later, as Tamara gathered her things to leave, Charles stopped her at the door. His voice was gruff, almost reluctant. "Come back tomorrow." Tamara hesitated, her heart racing. She wasn't a nanny, wasn't a chef, wasn't anything that belonged in this glittering world. But the look in his eyes wasn't one of arrogance now. It was desperation. And deep down, Tamara knew this was no longer just about food. It was about breaking through walls money had built. Tamara didn't know it yet, but each meal she cooked wasn't just feeding a hungry child. It was unraveling the armor of a man the world believed unshakable. And soon, that unraveling would put her at war with everything he stood for. The third evening at Whitman Estate felt different from the start. Tamara could sense it the moment she stepped into the mansion. The baby's cries still echoed faintly upstairs, but the air held another tension, thicker, sharper. This time, Charles wasn't alone. A cluster of sharply dressed executives lingered in the dining room, their laughter booming as glasses clinked. Suits worth more than Tamara's yearly wages filled the space, men and women with voices loud enough to demand the room's attention. Charles spotted her from across the room. He raised a glass, his smirk cold. "Gentlemen, this is Tamara, the miracle worker who thinks chicken stew is more powerful than medicine." The room chuckled. Tamara stiffened, clutching her grocery bag tighter. Her eyes dropped to the polished floor, heat rising in her cheeks. Charles motioned toward her like she was part of a performance. "Watch closely. She'll cook her magic potion. And somehow my son, who refuses everything else, eats like he's never seen food before. Isn't that something?" A woman in pearls snorted. So you've got yourself a witch doctor in the kitchen now? Laughter erupted. Tamara's chest burned, but she didn't move. She carried her bag into the kitchen, the sound of their mockery following her like a shadow. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Baby, never let their laughter take your dignity. You keep your head high, no matter how low they want you to bend. She set her bag on the counter and began chopping vegetables, steady and deliberate. The aromas filled the air once more. Garlic, onion, slow-simmered broth. The laughter from the other room faded as curiosity drew the guests closer, noses twitching at the scent. Charles leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "Tell me, Tamara," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Do you even know what it means to sit at a table like this? Do you understand the kind of world you're stepping into?" Tamara's knife paused mid-chop. She lifted her gaze to meet his, her voice even but firm. "I understand hunger. I understand loneliness. And I understand that your son doesn't care about marble tables or business deals. He just wants someone to care enough to feed him." A hush fell. For the first time, the room's laughter stilled. The scent of her stew swirled around them, undeniable, grounding. Charles's smirk faltered, replaced by something harder to name. He opened his mouth to reply, but a soft sound cut through, the baby's cries from upstairs. Without waiting for permission, Tamara ladled a bowl and carried it toward the stairs. The executives watched, silent now, as she ascended with quiet purpose. In the nursery, she found the boy red-faced, tiny fists flailing. She cradled him gently, humming as she spooned the stew into his small mouth. His cries melted into quiet gulps, then into soft, contented sighs. Tamara pressed a kiss to his forehead. "There now, little one. You're safe." Behind her, the nursery door creaked. Charles stood in the doorway, his executives crowded behind him, their polished shoes whispering against the carpet. Silence hung heavy. The baby slept, his tiny chest rising and falling in Tamara's arms. For a moment, even Charles seemed disarmed. But then his voice hardened, grasping at control. "Don't mistake this for importance. You're here because of what you can do, not because of who you are." Tamara rose slowly, laying the baby gently in his crib. She turned to him, her eyes unwavering. "Maybe that's the difference between us. You think worth comes from what someone has. I know it comes from who they are." Gasps rippled among the executives. No one dared speak to Charles Whitman like that. Charles's jaw clenched, fury flickering behind his eyes. But Tamara didn't flinch. She gathered her things, nodded once, and walked past the stunned crowd without another word. That night, back in her apartment, Tamara collapsed onto her bed, trembling. She had never spoken so boldly, never pushed back against power like that. Fear gnawed at her. Would he fire her, blacklist her, crush her with the same ease he crushed competitors? But beneath the fear was something else. A spark. For the first time, she hadn't just fed the child. She had stood up for herself. And though Charles Whitman would never admit it, that spark had left him rattled. Tamara didn't know it yet, but Charles wasn't finished. The humiliation in front of his peers burned too deep. He would strike back harder, sharper, determined to remind her who held the power. But Tamara had revealed something he couldn't erase. Her courage. And that courage would soon become his undoing. The call came 2 mornings later, just as Tamara was tying her apron for her diner shift. "Ms. Lewis." The voice was clipped, cold. "This is management. Effective immediately. Your employment is terminated. We've received concerning reports about your conduct. You don't need to return." Tamara's grip on the phone slipped. "What reports? I've never." The line went dead. Her chest tightened. Rent was already past due. Without the diner, she had nothing. And she didn't need to guess where the reports had come from. Charles Whitman. By the time she reached Whitman Estate that evening, fury burned beneath her fear. The baby cried upstairs, his wails echoing down the grand staircase. Charles stood in the foyer, flanked by two of his executives. His face was carved from stone. "I told you," he said evenly. "You're here because of what you can do, not who you are. And if you think you can embarrass me again, let me be clear. I can end you with one phone call. Your job, your apartment, your future, gone." Tamara's voice trembled, but she forced it steady. "You already tried. You took my job. What's next, Charles? You going to starve my mother too?" His eyes flickered at the mention of her mother, but his expression hardened. "Stay in line, and you'll be paid well. Step out again, and I'll make sure you have nothing left to lose." Tamara's stomach churned. He wasn't bluffing. He was a man who had built his empire by destroying anyone who got in his way. And yet, upstairs, the baby's cries pulled at her, louder, more desperate. She stepped past him without another word, climbing the stairs to the nursery. Charles didn't stop her. But his silence was a threat louder than words. The baby clutched at her blouse, his little body shaking with sobs. Tamara rocked him gently, humming as she fed him spoonfuls of stew. Slowly, his cries quieted. His breathing steadied. She kissed the top of his head, tears blurring her vision. What kind of world is this, she thought, where a child's only peace comes from the arms of a stranger because his father doesn't know how to love him? The nursery door creaked. It wasn't Charles. A woman stood there, her posture elegant, her eyes sharp. She was older, with streaks of silver in her dark hair, dressed in understated wealth. "Mrs. Whitman," Tamara whispered, startled. The woman smiled faintly. "Ex-Mrs. Whitman, technically. But yes, I'm Eleanor. I wanted to see the woman who managed to quiet my grandson." Tamara's heart pounded. She had never seen Charles's ex-wife before. Rumors whispered of a bitter divorce, of Eleanor vanishing from public life. And now here she was, standing in the nursery doorway, watching her grandson sleep in Tamara's arms. "You're the first person to reach that boy," Eleanor said softly. "Do you know how many specialists, nannies, and nurses Charles has cycled through? All the money in the world, and none of it worked." Tamara hesitated. "I just cook and hold him." Eleanor's eyes glistened. "That's exactly what he needs. Love. Something Charles never understood." Tamara felt her chest tighten. "Why are you telling me this?" Eleanor stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Because Charles will try to break you. He can't stand that you've succeeded where he failed. But I know his weakness." Tamara blinked. "His weakness?" "Yes," Eleanor said, her tone sharp as steel. "The one thing Charles can't control, truth. He built his empire on an image. Cold, flawless, invincible. But he's terrified of people seeing what's behind it. His vulnerability. His failure as a father." Tamara's hands trembled around the sleeping baby. For the first time, she saw the outline of a path. Dangerous, but possible. "If you keep standing," Eleanor whispered, "the world will see him for who he is. And no amount of money will save him." Later that night, Tamara returned to her apartment to find an envelope shoved under her door. Inside was a notice of eviction. She sank to the floor, tears streaking down her cheeks. Charles's threats weren't just words. He was tightening the noose, one cruel step at a time. But Eleanor's words echoed, "If you keep standing, the world will see him for who he is." Tamara clenched the eviction notice in her fists. Fear clawed at her, but so did fury. Charles Whitman had underestimated her. He thought he could strip her dignity away piece by piece until she crumbled. But he was about to learn that a woman who has nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind of opponent. Rain pounded Tamara's apartment roof that night, thunder rattling the window panes. She sat on the floor with bills and the eviction notice scattered around her like shrapnel. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind raced. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just fighting to survive poverty. She was fighting against a man who had the power to destroy her completely. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to hate him the way she wanted to, because she had seen the cracks. The billionaire who mocked her in front of executives was the same man who had cried, helpless, as his son wailed in his arms. And somewhere between those two men, Tamara saw the truth Eleanor had hinted at. Charles Whitman wasn't invincible. He was lonely, broken, and despite everything, her heart ached for him. The next evening, she returned to the mansion. Charles was waiting in the kitchen, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. His tie was loosened, his eyes tired. "You came back," he muttered. Tamara set her grocery bag on the counter. "Your son needs me." He let out a sharp laugh, though it held no humor. "Always about him, isn't it? Never about me." She turned, startled. The bitterness in his voice wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at himself. Charles's gaze locked on her. "Do you know what it's like to be hated by your own child? He screams when I hold him. He turns from me. And yet, the moment you touch him..." His jaw tightened. "What do you have that I don't?" Tamara swallowed hard. "Love. Patience. Things you can't buy." The words landed like a slap, but instead of anger, Charles's face twisted with something closer to pain. He sank onto a stool, running a hand through his hair. For a moment, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man lost in a storm. "Teach me," he whispered. Tamara froze. "What?" "Teach me how to reach him. How to love him the way you do." His voice cracked on the last word. "I don't know how." Her heart clenched. For the first time, she saw not the ruthless mogul, but a father begging for guidance. Slowly, she sat across from him. "You can't learn love from a lesson plan," she said softly. "But you can start by listening, by showing up, by letting yourself be human, even when it hurts." His eyes glistened. He nodded almost imperceptibly. And in that fragile silence, a new thread bound them, not of power or fear, but of truth. The next days blurred into something unexpected. Tamara cooked as always, but this time Charles stayed in the kitchen, watching closely, asking questions. He held his son while she guided him, correcting the way he cradled the small body, showing him how to hum softly instead of barking orders at nurses. At first, the baby cried, but slowly, hesitantly, he began to settle in his father's arms. The first time the boy fell asleep against Charles's chest, Tamara saw tears streak his face again. And something inside her shifted too, because in that moment, Charles Whitman wasn't her enemy. He was a man learning to love. But the mansion's walls still carried shadows. One evening, as Tamara tucked the baby into his crib, Charles lingered by the door, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "You confuse me," he said finally. She turned, startled. "How?" "You stand up to me. You look me in the eye when no one else dares. You walk into this house with nothing, and yet somehow I feel like you own more of it than I do." Tamara's breath caught. Heat rushed to her cheeks. She forced herself to steady her voice. "Maybe it's not about owning Charles. Maybe it's about belonging." Their eyes met, the silence between them thick. For a heartbeat, she thought he might step closer, close the space between them. But instead, he turned abruptly, muttering, "Good night," before disappearing down the hall. Tamara pressed a hand to her chest, her heart racing. She couldn't deny it anymore. Beneath the battles and the pain, something deeper was blooming. Something dangerous. Because the more she saw the man behind the armor, the harder it became to remember she was supposed to hate him. The baby's laughter echoed through the marble halls, a sound Tamara had never heard from him before. He giggled as Charles lifted him high into the air, his tiny arms flailing in delight. Tamara stood in the doorway, her heart swelling. For days she had coached Charles on gentleness, on patience. And now, seeing father and son together, she felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. But warmth was fragile, and shadows waited to reclaim the house. That evening, as Tamara prepared to leave, she overheard voices in the study. The door was cracked, and Charles's tone was cold, clipped, the tone of the man she'd met on her first night here. "She's nothing," Charles hissed. "A maid who got lucky. Do whatever it takes. Make sure the press doesn't hear she's been in this house. The last thing I need is a headline about a billionaire relying on a poor woman to raise his son." Tamara's stomach twisted. Her hands went cold. She stumbled back, her heart pounding, but the creak of the floor betrayed her. The study door flung open. Charles stood there, his face pale as he realized what she'd heard. "Tamara." Her voice shook with fury. "Nothing. That's what I am to you. After everything." He stepped forward, reaching for her arm. "It's not what you think." She pulled back, her eyes blazing. "No, Charles. It's exactly what I think. You'll let me feed your child, teach you how to hold him, cry in front of me. But the moment your pride feels threatened, I'm just nothing." Silence stretched between them, sharp as glass. The baby's laughter upstairs felt like a cruel echo of the moment shattering below. For the first time in days, Charles's mask cracked wide open, not into arrogance but desperation. His voice broke. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand." Tamara snapped, tears burning her eyes. "Why tear me down when all I've done is help you?" His fists clenched, then loosened. His shoulders sagged. And finally, his truth tumbled out. "Because if I admit how much I need you, then I have nothing left to hide behind. I built this empire so no one could ever see my weakness. Not my board, not my enemies, not even my family. But you," his chest heaved. "You walked in here with nothing, and suddenly I feel like you see everything. And it terrifies me." Tamara's breath caught. His confession sliced through her anger, leaving only rawness between them. She stepped closer, trembling. "Charles, weakness isn't being seen. It's refusing to let anyone in. Your son doesn't need perfection. He needs you. And—" her voice faltered. "So do I." The words hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. Charles stared at her, his walls collapsing in slow motion. Then, before either of them could think, he closed the distance. His hands cupped her face, his lips pressed against hers. Hungry, desperate, filled with all the emotions he had tried to bury. Tamara froze for half a heartbeat. Then she melted into the kiss, her hands clutching his shirt, tears mingling with the fire between them. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't neat. It was messy, broken, raw. But it was real. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, their foreheads pressed together. "I shouldn't," Charles whispered. "You deserve so much more than a man who spent his life hiding behind money." Tamara's voice was steady now, stronger than her trembling body. "Then stop hiding. Be the man your son deserves. Be the man I see when the armor comes off." Charles's eyes glistened, and for the first time in his adult life, he nodded. Not to a business partner, not to an investor, but to a woman who saw through him completely. The next morning, Tamara expected silence, rejection, maybe even banishment from the mansion. Instead, when she arrived, the house buzzed with tension. A dozen cars lined the driveway. Suited men and women filled the living room, their voices sharp with accusation. Charles's board of directors had descended. "This is unacceptable," one barked. "You're distracted. Your son's care has become gossip in the press. And now this maid." Another slammed a folder on the table. "You're risking everything for sentiment. If you can't get control, we will." Charles stood at the head of the room, jaw tight, eyes shadowed. For a moment, Tamara feared he would fold, slip back into the ruthless man who always chose power over people. Then his gaze found hers, and everything changed. He stepped forward, voice ringing like steel. "You're right," he said to the board. "I am risking everything. Because for the first time, I've found something worth more than money. A woman who gave my son what all your wealth and all my pride couldn't, love. And if standing with her costs me this empire, so be it." Gasps filled the room. The board erupted in protest. But Charles didn't flinch. He crossed the room, took Tamara's hand in his, and faced them all. "This woman isn't just a maid," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "She's the reason my son laughs. She's the reason I remember I'm human. And if you can't accept that, then I'll build something new without you." Tamara's breath caught. Tears blurred her vision. The man who once threatened to erase her had just declared her his everything in front of his entire empire. The board stormed out, furious, but Charles didn't watch them go. His hand tightened around Tamara's. "You shouldn't have to pay for my choices," he whispered. Tamara shook her head, tears spilling freely now. "Charles, this isn't about money. It's about finally being seen. And right now I see you. All of you." His lips trembled. He leaned down, kissed her softly this time, not with desperation but with promise. And in that moment, the walls that had once kept her out crumbled completely. Weeks later, the mansion looked different. Not in its polished marble or gleaming chandeliers, but in the warmth that filled it. The baby giggled on the rug, his chubby hands clapping as Tamara stirred a pot in the kitchen. Charles entered, sleeves rolled up, no tie, carrying a stack of freshly washed bottles. He moved to her side, stealing a taste of her stew with a grin. "You're learning," Tamara teased. "I had a good teacher," he replied, his eyes softening as they met hers. The baby squealed, reaching for both of them. Together they lifted him, laughter echoing through the halls that once knew only silence. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the estate in gold, Charles took Tamara's hands. "I've built towers, Tamara. I've signed deals that made me richer than I ever dreamed. But none of it matters. Not compared to this. To you. To us." Her throat tightened, but she smiled through tears. "And I never thought I'd find love in a place like this. But here we are." He kissed her then, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that wasn't about passion alone but about forever. And for the first time in both their lives, they knew they weren't alone anymore. 6 months later, headlines splashed across the news. Billionaire Charles Whitman steps down, chooses family over fortune. But in the Whitman home, those words didn't matter. What mattered was a baby's laughter, the scent of Tamara's cooking, and two hearts that had once stood on opposite sides of a battlefield now beating together in peace. Tamara had walked into the mansion as a maid. She stayed as a mother. And she was loved as more than she ever dreamed she could be.
If you were Tamara, would you forgive Charles after everything, or walk away? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And thank you so much for watching this story to the end. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of hope, love, and transformation. Click the next video on your screen now. You won't want to miss it. And always remember,